losses in the House and the Senate and at the gubernatorial level last night as the GOP made major gains. And the general consensus was it was a rejection in large measure of President Obama's policies, something he acknowledged in part and made clear that in his view, he thought last night was all about the economy, that the president and his agenda had made progress on that front, but the American people are not feeling it, saying that we want people to act responsibly in D.C. was the message he took from Americans, and to achieve consensus and to focus completely on jobs. There was plenty in there to chew on. I want to bring in our political panel now for their perspective, including Monica Crowley, radio talk show host and Fox News contributor. Also Richard Socarides, Democratic strategist and former special assistant to President Clinton, and Doug Schoen, Democratic pollster and co-author of the book Mad as Hell. He's also a Fox News contributor. Monica, let me start with you. Your thoughts, your overall thoughts on the president's message.
Well, first of all, he looked like he was passing a gallstone. He was not very happy to be there, and understandably so. What I found very remarkable about this presser, Megyn, is the fact that he seemed self-aware toward the end of the press conference, sort of reflecting on the personal nature of his job. But there wasn't a lot of self-awareness about the wholesale rejection last night of his major legislative achievements, namely Obamacare, namely the nearly $1 trillion in stimulus, namely even cap and trade, which he did spend a good deal of time talking about. He also didn't acknowledge that the American people over the past 2 years have felt two different levels of fear and anxiety. The first level is the urgent and immediate economic fear. Am I going to be able to keep my job? Am I going to lose my job? Will I ever find another job? Is the bank going to foreclose on my home? But there's a more profound level of fear that was percolating underneath all of that, which is that the very nature of America is changing under this presidency and changing under the last Congress.
But he tried to acknowledge that in part where he said people have misperceived, if you will, that that's my agenda as opposed to my reaction to what he repeatedly described as an emergency. We were in an emergency situation. He did not particularly use that to justify the health care law, but he used it to talk about stimulus and bailing out the banks and bailing out the auto industry. And he suggested that people sort of had the wrong idea that he was about big government as a result of that.
But here's the inconsistency, Megyn. He was talking about being in a rush, that I had to sign all of these very incredibly expensive bills that blew up the deficit because we were in a fiscal and economic emergency. Well, then why, pray tell, did he spend a year focused on Obamacare? He blew the first year of his presidency, blew through a lot of the political capital he had when he got in on a health care bill that most Americans did not want and that we could not afford. Now I find it remarkable that he is saying, well, now we've got to focus on jobs. We've got to focus on improving relations with the business community. We've got to focus on economic growth. Megyn, he blew the first year and a half of his presidency focused elsewhere. And now maybe the Republican Congress will force his hand on a lot of these issues to get economic growth going, namely the Bush tax cuts and so on. But even there, he would only go halfway and not say that he was for the extension of all of the Bush tax cuts.
Doug, let me bring you in because you've done a lot of polling on this. This is just one example. I've got a lot of emails from our viewers. We're taking them still at kelly@foxnews.com. But this is one example that is representative of several. From Brian in Warwick, New York. Hi, Megyn. He says, listening to Obama's speech, in all caps, he still doesn't get it. We want small government, tax cuts, and massive spending cuts. Period. Doug?
Well, Megyn, there are certainly voters who feel like that email reflects. But bottom line, and I think Monica is going a little too far, this was a humble, contrite president who was suggesting he's willing to go much further to meet the Republicans halfway than he's gone before on job development, on taxes, and even tax cuts. Bargaining is done over time. You have to look forward, not backwards. And my sense was this was the start of a process, an important press conference, and I think to look prospectively at what this could imply gives hope for those of us moderate Democrats who believe in bipartisan cooperation. Haven't seen it, as Monica suggested, in the past, but the president is signaling he's open to deal.
Richard, you know, when I heard the president talk about areas where they might now be able to find common ground, this is what he ticked off. Jobs, clean energy, work on the deficit, education, and technology investments. It didn't sound like anything that ambitious. It sounded like a much different agenda than we heard from this president back in 2008.
Yeah, I think it's tough. I mean, clearly he is still trying to absorb what happened last night. And, you know, I thought that in the beginning he was a little flat, a little, you know, could have been a little more passionate. I think what he had to do today, I agree with Doug that I think it was very important and it's a beginning, but I think what he had to do today was let the American people know that he understood what happened, and he did that a little bit more at the end where he said we took a shellacking. And
he humanized himself there.
He warmed up. He definitely warmed up. He said, I thought that was important that he said it was a shellacking, and then also he said that
it feels bad.
He lost track. He lost track a little bit, and he feels bad. So I think that was important. But what I would have hoped to have seen a little bit more of was a plan going forward. I mean, there was nothing. There was no talk about bringing new people in. I think it's really important for him now to bring in some Republicans, to bring in some moderate Republicans into the White House and on the White House staff, and expand that field of play there. And I just think that he's still absorbing this. He was a little passionless for me.
Monica, do you think, bottom line, as you walk away today, that he is changed, that his approach to his policymaking has now changed?
You know, Megyn, there is nothing in his political character or temperament, or even in his political history, to suggest moderation. And I didn't hear anything to change my mind on that today. What I heard was a man who talked about a willingness to sit with the other side, a willingness to compromise on certain small bore issues, as you pointed out. But remember, over the past year and a half, he has used that line before on health care. Well, I'll bring in the Republicans, and if they've got some good ideas, I'll be happy to listen to them. There's a difference between sitting down with somebody and just letting them go off on their ideas and actually absorbing and incorporating those ideas. He did not do that in the last year and a half. Now, the complexion of the Congress will change come January. He might be forced to, but there's nothing in his past history to suggest that he will do a Bill Clinton and tone down the ideology and be more pragmatic.
And I want to get a quick answer from Richard and Doug on this. You know, he seemed to have a new justification today with respect to the stimulus and some of his bailouts that were very unpopular with some of the voters. We heard several times today, emergency. It was an emergency. Right. We had to act, and we heard a theme he's developed over the past 2 weeks, which was we had to prevent a second Great Depression. Doug, is it too little on that, or is that now an effective message for him?
Well, I think that is his pivot to all ideas are on the table. I think what he was saying to me was, look, I'm willing to do tax cuts if you give me something for business. I'm willing to put energy initiatives on the table. I heard a new willingness to cooperate, and to Monica's point, given the change in the Congress, he's going to have to, otherwise he's a one-term president.
You agree with that, Richard?
I do. I heard a new willingness to cooperate. I don't think anybody expected him to walk away from the substance of the policy debate that we've been having, either on financial regulatory reform or on health care. I mean, he can't do that now. But I do think there's a new willingness to compromise. I wish I had seen a little bit more specifically about what he's going to do to change the culture, to encourage cooperation, but that can come. I think they're still absorbing it. It's very tough. I think he warmed up at the end, and I think it's headed in the right direction.
On health care, he said we would be misreading the election if we thought Americans want to see us relitigate these issues. But he did say if the Republicans want to suggest modifications, he's happy to consider them. You heard him talk about his willingness to listen. Yeah, he said this. John Boehner said he's willing to listen. A lot of people are going to be listening. We'll find out who's going to be doing the talking. Not us anymore, because I got to wrap this panel. Richard, Doug, Monica, thank you all so much.
Thanks, Megyn.
And we have a Fox News election alert here in this new hour of America Live.